Thank you so much for joining me today for another inspiring episode of In the Name of Service. I'm your host, Dr. Barb Thompson. As a United States Army veteran and operational psychologist, I've spent my career working with military and law enforcement units, conducting in-depth interviews with hundreds of individuals who are hoping to earn their place on high-risk, high-performing teams. In most cases, they've already put in years of grueling physical and mental work just to get a chance to serve and sacrifice more. And that type of selflessness is special, and I feel worthy of recognition. While each person's story is unique and every path to service different, their goals are similar: to do something more, to be part of something bigger, to make a difference. These difference makers were the catalyst behind this podcast, and it's my privilege to share their stories with you. So today I get to introduce you to Ryan Glynn, and he may just be the most interesting man you've ever met. He's gone through all kinds of different life experiences. He spent time in the Navy in several different roles. He was a professional firefighter. He's owned a CrossFit gym. He's been in real estate investing, and he's now in executive coaching. And I'll let him tell you about that. But you're gonna want to go and find him after this and learn more about him. Today will just be a drop in the bucket. We'll get to hear a little bit about his story and what's fueling him and how that relates to you. So, Ryan, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey Barb, thank you so much. That was man, that was a solid introduction. I didn't even think you were talking about me there in the beginning. But yep, so my name is Ryan my name is Ryan Glynn Allday, and I just kind of go with Ryan Glynn because I think I chose my middle name because Ryan Glynn just sounds kind of cool to me, so I left it at that. Um a little about me, man. How far back do we want to go and kind of dig in? Like that's the that's
Let's tell
always
them who you are now, and then we'll go back.
yeah. So right now, I think the biggest thing that I can say this on the table for me has to do with being a parent,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of everything that is around trying to be a good parent, right? And the reason the reason I think that's so important is, well, take that back. The foundation of being a good parent for me is being a good person, right? So when I got to the point in my life where, okay, all the normal life stuff is kind of um not the highest priority, like going to work and going out and playing and having fun. Basically, when you get to the point where you're not just selfish about yourself anymore and you're
Yeah.
putting other things first, like that put me on that path, to where how do I to ask myself the question, how do I become the best parent that I can right now? And ultimately, I believe the foundation of that statement is being the best person you can be, being the best self you can be, right?
Right.
And that's a very fundamental statement, but there's thousands of layers to that you can peel back. And where I'm at now is just trying to make myself aware of those
Mm-hmm.
layers so I can
Mm-hmm.
start addressing those layers, right? So
Right.
it's basically, some people can call it an awakening. Some people call it like finding your path, like finding who you
That's
are.
right.
Um, but the more I dig into this, the more I realize that it's less of finding a path or finding a thing external and more
Mm-hmm.
of going back to what you really are on the inside.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I am now, aside from if we take off the path to get there, that's just kind of where I am right now, is exploring how I can be the best version of myself so I can be the best parent, and then sharing that with the world. Because the more that I work with people, the more people that I talk to, especially the fathers that have gone through struggle in relation to their children, the more I
Mm-hmm.
realize that there's not enough resource out there.
No.
And the main resource is just someone to talk to that can understand,
Right.
someone that can listen and understand, because it seems like the more time goes on, the less true connection people actually have with each other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're connected extremely, well, through technology, but it's such a surface level connection that we're not getting the things that truly matter, I think. So that's kind of
Yeah.
the space that I'm in now is trying to explore that development and kind of spread that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's so neat and it's so unique. And it takes a lot of courage, I think, to be in that space because parenting seems like something that should come naturally to us. And I think there's a lot of guilt and shame around that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm a psychologist. I should naturally be a good mother. Like, nope, very different. So I applaud
Mhm.
you for just your courage, but also how what a blessed individual is your son, you know, for you as a dad to realize what an honor it is to
Mhm.
have, you know, created this human life and to get to guide it along. And I'm excited that later he'll get to hear, you know,
Yeah.
your story, honestly. So
Mhm.
we're going to get back to kind of the space you're in right now and how you're helping people. But
Mhm.
first, I want to go back in your story. And if you could just um, tell us a few of the what you found to be, you know, in your reflection, kind of foundational experiences in your childhood that have led you to be the person that you are today.
Okay. So just to clarify that question, like, are you asking specific events, or do you just want me to talk philosophy on those things?
Whatever feels right to you, like just how to explain um, for the listener kind
Mhm.
of your own development. So whether that's,
Mhm.
you know, obviously like just growing up or if I think part of that has to do with, you know, your experiences as you went into the Navy and out and things
Right.
like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll try to touch on a little because it can kind of get in depth there. But the fundamental, and I'll start with the philosophy. So when we talk about who a person is, and again, I'm no expert. I don't have any special letters by my name, or I'm not a psychologist or anything. But I have spent a lot of intentional time looking back, reflecting, and things like that, and just loads of research and reading, just trying to understand things. So
Yeah.
the fundamental philosophy, I think, is looking back from a person's childhood to now. Man, we all have things that shaped us, right?
For
We have
sure.
experiences, and I can, and myself, just like many other people, we can talk about all the bad things that happen to us. The quote unquote bad things.
Right.
Um, and I can talk about some of those, but the philosophy that I want to have people understand in relation to that is how we're viewing those events will dictate like the outcomes moving forward.
Mhm.
Okay, so in my past, like I had a rough childhood, like a lot of other people. I always get hung up on how to talk about this to get into it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
just
know it's so
because
hard to know like, well, where do I start?
Yeah, like, well, where do I draw the lines between, like sharing and not sharing, and trying to get into
Yeah,
that. So
sure.
yeah, so I you know, here's what I can say. Reflecting back on my childhood, the things that happened then, a lot of times as a child, you don't necessarily know things are good or bad. You don't have the perspective in life yet, right?
Right.
So what I see happening is these things that are happening in childhood up to a certain point, they're just life. It's just normal life, right? And it's not until you grow and you develop and you see other people's families, or you
Right.
see other people's childhood, that you can kind of have that contrast to say, and it to the contrast to say, okay, this is abnormal. And
Mhm.
then it takes so many years, because you as you get an adult, if you're conscious and aware and want to understand yourself and why you do the things you do, you have to look back. You have to look back and reflect on those experiences, and try to figure out how they shaped you and why you are the way that you are.
Right.
Right. So a lot of that just kind of to find meaning. And the difficult thing, the thing that makes, now I'm kind of, I start jumping ahead and getting around. I haven't answered your question yet, have I? I haven't dug into like the stuff about my past and everything growing up. So do you want me to just kind of like touch on it and just list some of the like shitty things that people could conceive as shitty about
Yeah,
my
because
past? And then,
I I would, just because I think that gives them a picture in their mind to say, well, look at him
yeah,
now. You know what I mean?
right,
And so that
right,
philosophy does work because he's able to go after, you know, what he feels like he's been called to do in spite of, and maybe because of the difficult things
yeah,
he's been through.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So yeah, so if we kind of jump back and start talking, so some of the things that people could label as bad or not good in the childhood. So um kind of the overall theme of my childhood was, I was born in 77. So I grew up, the late 70s and the early 80s. And the father was typically never at home, or the male in the family was never at home. So my, like the culture of me growing up was the mother is kind of there taking care of the children and the father's always gone. So for me, that's kind of what my experience was up until I was like 8 or 9 years old. So, and we were kind of transient. Like, so my whole life has been transient, even as a child. So my father was always working, or the person that I thought was my father, right? He was
Yeah.
always working away, and we would travel, whether we'd be living in a camper van or a hotel or whatever. I remember a lot of traveling growing up, and I remember one time we were, and I think we were in a hotel, and I'm 8 years old, and my mother just comes to me out of the blue, it seemed, and said, "Hey, this guy here that you've been calling your dad for the past 8 years, he's not really your dad. Do you want to go and meet your dad?" And me being an 8 year old, I don't, you don't understand the gravity of that type of situation. You're just like, "Oh, yeah, sure." And that's what I said. Yeah, why not? And the next thing I knew, he's at work. We just pack up all our stuff and leave. Like he, I don't know if he got a phone call. I don't know if she let him know. I don't know if he came home from work and the fucking room was empty and he
Yeah.
just didn't know what was going on, right? Because there's no cell phones back then and none of that. Like you can't track people the way you do
Right.
now with
Yeah.
with electronics. So yeah, we left and we go to meet this other man, and kind of the same situation with him. Like his employment took him away, right? So I spent maybe, was that 9, 10, 11, 12? I spent a few years with that person, and then from there my recollection of my childhood was just a lot of bouncing around, between those two men and other men at the same time. So we
Yeah.
got a lot of bouncing around, and some of the things that I reflect back on. It's easy to call situations bad in that type of environment, but it's also you can find something positive in
Right.
those situations.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the things that people would label bad in that is like, there was, out of all the people that were filling the role of the elder or the parent in my life at that time, none of them had any degree of emotional development.
Yeah.
Even
Right.
for as long as I know them, like my stepdad, which is who I call my dad. I'm not to say anything bad about him, but his emotional development is not where I needed it to be. Let's just say
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Okay. So all the people that were filling that role, they had no emotional development. So I had no real connection with anyone. Like, my mother, she never really did anything with her life. She barely had a job. I remember, like, at corner stores or gas stations, shit like that. But most of the time she was just passed out somewhere because she was heavy and into drugs and drinking and all that. So most of the time she was passed out somewhere. So I didn't have that type of structure. When I think back, the most structure I had came from like grandparents, So I,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember more, I remember more learning milestones from grandparents or great grandparents than I do like from inside the house, right?
Yeah.
So someone could call that bad. The once we, the 9 or 10 year old, when I left that home and got connected with my biological father, he had zero emotional development. Like, it was literally his philosophy was, if you're a child, you're just there and you don't speak. And he
Mhm.
didn't, and I don't remember, I can't remember a single conversation with him like at all. Like it was more like from his perspective, it was just a fear-based way of, well, from my perspective of him, it was just a fear-based way of, if you want to call it parenting, but
Oh, yeah.
of being around
Of
children.
being. Mhm.
It was just more of a fear based thing. So there were no conversations, there was no like contact, like hugging, none of that shit. Right there was none of that. So it was more just like shit, like what you would think being in prison was like, and then the prison guards type thing. So that's
Right.
kind
Now
of
it's time for your meal. Now it's your outside time, and now it's your
yeah,
bedtime.
yeah. So there was no there, and man, I think about that type of scenario with all those people that filled that parental role, and I try to look at both sides. Like,
Sure.
how can I give them credit for something? How can I,
Right.
say
Right.
they did something good? And I think I'm split down the middle on that. I'm split down the middle on that. And if I were to talk about a philosophy, sometimes, a lot of times we hear the term "did the best I could." They did the best they could, or I did the best I could. I'm doing the best I can, right?
Yeah.
I absolutely do not believe in that philosophy. Like I don't think that's a term I don't think that's a phrase that can be applied to us as humans, right? And I'll give you an example of that. So uh, think of a simple machine. Like there's like 5 or 6 simple machines, right? Think of the lever. That's the easiest one to think of. You have a stick and a fulcrum, right? A machine can do the best that it can. So let's say we have a normal lever here with the fulcrum and we're lifting a weight, right? Does that, and this is a question for you, does that machine have the ability to lift unlimited weight?
No. There's a limit.
There's a limit, right? So what is the limit on that machine? So let's just say the
Whatever,
lever,
probably whatever it's been tested for, or
whatever is created. So say the
yeah.
the lever is a wooden stick. Okay, so I have a wooden stick. That machine can lift a certain amount of weight, and if you add a fraction more weight, what happens to the lever?
It breaks.
It breaks. Okay, so a machine can do the best that it can. That lever can do the best that it can, and then when you go beyond that, it's broken and it never works again. Right. So how do we get that machine to do more work, to lift more weight? We have to use a different material. Now we put a steel bar in there. Can that steel bar lift more than the wood? Yes.
Right. Yes.
Can that
Mhm.
steel bar lift an unlimited amount of weight? No, it
No.
has a limit, right? But
Yeah.
up to that fractional limit, it has done the best that it can. We as humans, we don't function like that. We can always do more. If you look at anything in life, we're consistently progressing. In
Mhm.
any athletics are progressing. The way that we think, the way that we understand the world, everything is progressing, right? So the minute I hear someone say, "Oh, I did the best I could," my immediate thought is that's a fucking cop out, right? That's something that you have told yourself to let yourself off the hook for the effort that you didn't put in.
Mhm.
That's what I think, right? So when we talk about that, do the best they can. I'm kind of getting off track, but this is important in philosophy when we get further down the road and we start
Yeah.
talking about some of the notes that I have there.
Well,
That
how, going from where you came from, where essentially you're raising yourself minus some
mhm,
probably like negative input from some people and some positive input from your grandparents,
right.
when it's time, like you're an adult, how did you even know like what to do next? you know
Yeah, that's a great question, Barb. So I'll elaborate a little bit more on the childhood stuff and kind of tie that into how did I know what to do next or what the
yeah.
next step is, right? So kind of like I said, I had those influences growing up, but the mostly I was just left alone. I was
Right.
just left alone to do whatever I wanted to do, right? And that kind of led me down um a different path. So a little bit more. Man, that's a good question. I'll tell you some of the experiences that I did experience with my mother, and how that will answer the question is sometimes you learn what to do by learning what not to do, what you
Oh,
don't.
absolutely.
right?
Yes.
So with her, I remember, we had already, this is some other man that we're living with now, and I'm probably 13, 14, 15. And where I come from, down from the South, when you're 15 years old, you can get your driver's license. You can get your driver's
Mm-hmm.
license at that time. So most of my time, 12, 13, and 14, I spent working with my grandfather. He had a horse farm. So I was working with him, making money and stuff like that. At that time, she was with another man. He was gone somewhere. She's just most of the time just passed out on the bed. She's just unconscious, right? And I remember during those ages, 13, 14, 15, I was I have a little brother that lived with me at the time, and I was making sure that we had groceries. I was either buying the food for the house out of the money I was making when I was working, and I was also working at McDonald's, so I would bring food home every night from McDonald's. Like back then, what you could do is they would let you take the extra food home. So
Yeah.
two
You're
to
like,
3 hours before they
yes,
closed,
please and thank
huh?
you.
Yeah, exactly. I would
Yeah.
just cook up all kinds of extra food, and then I would just be carrying these big bags home, and that's what I fed me and my brother with is McDonald's for years, right? It got to the point where I and I'm thinking back, like as a 14, 15-year old, I bought a safe. Like I bought a safe to keep in my room, and I'm like, well, why did you have a safe? Well, I had money that was always coming up missing, right? So I bought this safe, and one year for my birthday, I was completely surprised. I think I was 15, 14 or 15. I came home from school and there's this big, huge, like weightlifting system. You know what I'm saying? The old school, like pulleys and weights and shit
Yeah.
everywhere. I was like, oh man, that's so awesome. They actually got me a present, a gift, right? And I realized that they had broken into my safe, took my money, and used that money to buy the gift.
Wow.
Okay. And not more than 2 to 3 weeks later, within a week or two, I come back home from school. The weight thing is gone. So they broke into my safe. They used my money, bought me a gift. Then they took that gift back and got my money back for it and kept the
Mm.
money.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of thing kind of kept playing itself throughout the next couple of years. Once I turned 15, I had worked with my grandfather enough to buy a truck, right? So I'm a 15-year-old kid, got my first truck. I'm thinking life is good. And I remember a conversation my mother had with me. She was like, "Hey, my boyfriend, whoever, whatever his name was, he's working construction and he only has a car. He needs a truck. How would you feel about letting him borrow the truck and you just use his car?" And at that time, I was really big into like speakers and bass and all that. And this is how she tricked me into it. She was like, "Look, that back seat of the car, you can take the back seat out and you can put all the speakers in you want. You can't fit those speakers in your truck. You can fit them in the car." I'm like, "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." So I let him borrow the truck, and I don't know, a couple months later, the truck's gone. They sold it. Then they took the car back. So I'm back with nothing again. Right. So that's kind of the path that went with me and parental figures. It was just like, I learned what not to do, or
Right.
I learned things not to do, like taking away the violence that you would see in there. I haven't talked about that you would see in the household, but I remember at a very young age, like telling myself, making the declaration that, like, no matter what happens, I'm never gonna allow my children to see like that type of anger and
Yeah.
violence where
Right.
things are being thrown around and stuff like that. um, so that is kind of, a lot of that stuff you can learn. You can look at it and you can beat yourself up and drive yourself down with it, or you can take those things and use
Right.
those as a stepping stone to
Yeah.
step up.
Right.
Right. So most of my life, I was never, I don't know if it's genetic in me or if it was like a legitimate decision, but I never looked at that stuff like, yeah, it sucked at the time. And I was like, fuck, this sucks. But thinking back on it, I was never like, oh, woe is me. What do I do? My mentality was always, okay, how do I move forward? It was just
Right.
like, what's
Yeah.
next? I never, even, man, that's just followed me through my whole, like I said, I don't know if it's genetic or it was just a byproduct of living in that type of environment where, like, if you wanted anything or if you wanted to do anything, you could you couldn't sit around and cry about someone like her stealing your shit, or cry about not having a truck. You still don't have a truck, so you just got to keep moving,
Yeah.
right? So that thinking back, that's just always been my mentality, is I never slowed down enough to let myself feel bad. I just made a decision and moved. Like once that, I think somewhere around 15, like when that whole truck thing happened. And mind you, throughout these years, I'm jumping back and forth through
Oh,
different
yeah.
schools and different
Right.
parents, and this and that. But somewhere around 15, I was just like, boom, cut her off, and I'll never talk to her again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think about it, I didn't dwell on it. It was just cut, and then life, keep living
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So I never spent the time down in the gutter saying, woe is me, this shit sucks, because like I was saying earlier, that was just life for me at the time, right? I didn't have perspective to know
Mm-hmm.
how bad that sucked. I didn't have perspective. I didn't know what a good parent was to be able to say that's a bad parent. To me, it was
Right.
just life. I was just living life. So I had to keep living life,
Yeah.
right? Does that kind of
Yeah.
encompass a little bit of
Oh my
that?
gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And it
Okay.
also, I mean, I think it helps people understand the whole kind of potential mindset you have, and that line that you were using is just perfect. It's not necessarily like good or bad, it's just how do I keep going? How do I progress from here? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is this situation, how do I progress from here? And it's a forward motion rather than, like you said, just sitting and dwelling on it. So,
Right,
um
right.
yeah, I think that's very helpful. And you wanting this kind of freedom, to live a life that you have more control over. Obviously, a lot of things were taken from you constantly,
Yeah.
like led you into these different things where you kept exploring, and you definitely
Mm-hmm.
have an exploring nature about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, so some people would call that traumatic, but you wouldn't, right? And then, you spent time in the Navy. You did some things there, did some hard things.
mhm,
And I know as a firefighter, you saw some very difficult things, but you
mhm,
do have a different way of describing what's been kind of the most, if we want to use that word, traumatic experience for you, which was kind of recently. So can you just take us through, I mean, despite what the world would say and categorize as like, oh yeah, that was a bad thing, or that was a bad thing, or oh, that's the traumatic thing. Really, it
uh-huh,
was something different for you, but you've also found a way to grow through that. So if you could,
mhm,
if you're willing to talk us through kind
mhm.
of that most recent struggle.
Yeah, so, um, what I think, how can I kind of segue into this? Before we dig into that type of stuff, I think it's safe to say that w as humans, we all struggle.
For
Sometimes we
sure.
struggle immensely. Sometimes we
100%.
struggle immensely and deeply, right?
Yes.
Sometimes we get to a place where we just feel like we're at the bottom and there's no light. It's
Yes.
completely dark, and we can't see our way out. We
Yes.
can't find a way out, right?
Yes.
It's safe to say that as humans, we've all been there. Most of us have been there, right? And to talk about to talk about that pain and that suffering, I think we have to back up and have some general understanding. And this is kind of where I can talk about my path, and where I can talk about the tools I think that
Yes.
help a person when they're in
Right.
that place, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is that kind of like where you want to go with
Yes.
it? Good, good. Um, so I think the first thing we need to do, or for me, the first step was understanding, right?
Mhm.
And that sounds extremely simple, but it's so complex, because I feel like there's so much about ourselves and the way the world operates that we don't understand, that we haven't
Mhm.
put the time to dig in deep enough to really know what's going on.
Right.
Most people are operating on autopilot,
Mhm.
and they think that what they feel or what they're going through is what it is, that it's a universal truth,
Right.
right? So what I want to talk about now is kind of laying the foundation. What I think is important, what was important for me to lay the foundation to kind of change the
Yeah.
way that those things affected me.
I love it.
Okay. So the first thing the first thing I think is important for people to understand is, and this is what I think is foundational. Okay, some foundational things, some foundational understanding that now gives people the tools to move forward. The first thing is understanding how we operate. Like we as humans, think of your mind like a computer. Okay, a computer operates because it has been assigned a certain code, and it operates within the parameters of that code. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So we as humans, we're the same way. Our minds are kind of like that computer. It's operating within the parameters of a code.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the issues most of us are oblivious to is how that operating system is actually running. We don't understand how that system is running or what built the system in the first place. We think that it just is what it is. Okay. So let's identify some pieces of that system and talk about rewriting that
Love it.
system.
Okay.
Okay. So for me, that code, the first step, in rewriting that code is understanding where the power is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is this is extremely important. And I put this first because I think it is the bedrock. It is the foundation of something we can stand on when we're down there. Like when we're flailing around at the bottom and we're just wallowing in the pit of just pity and despair, we need something to grab a hold of. Like a house, a home, you know what bedrock is, right?
Oh yeah.
Bedrock
Yeah.
is the part of the earth that we have to drill down to, we have to get down to
Right.
before we even pour a foundation of a house, right?
Right. Because
If you
it's
build a
solid.
house
It's
on
not
sand,
moving. Right.
right, it's not moving, it's solid. You know, when you hit bedrock, now when you build up from there, everything is solid. It doesn't matter if you build $1 million home on the sand, the magnificence of the home doesn't matter if you're not built on bedrock. The same with us, right? So that foundation, the first step is understanding, shifting the power from something external to internal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I think is the foundation. What the first thing that we can grab is realizing that we have the power, and the power to do what? That's the next question, right? What do we have the power to do? And let me ask you this before I answer that question. What do you think, Barb, is the most powerful thing in the world?
Oh, I don't know. That's a really difficult question.
It is
Aside from the creator of the world, I would say our minds.
within the context of the human realm.
Okay. Then I would have to go with our minds.
Okay, right. And what about our minds would you say is the most powerful? That's a great answer. What about our minds?
I think um the pliability
Mm-hmm.
that they
Okay.
can change.
Right, right. So if I were to simplify what I understand what you're saying, if I were to simplify that, I would challenge that the most powerful thing in the world is a belief or a thought.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I love it.
So think about what has happened in the world. If you reflect back on history, think about the worst things that have ever been done by humanity. What fueled those things?
Sure. I mean,
What
starts in the
power?
mind, right? Yeah.
What power those things? These are thoughts and beliefs, right? So let me
Mm-hmm.
ask you this question. If you and I were in a park right now, just a random city park, and I hand you a gun and I say, walk up to this guy and shoot him in the head, would you do that?
No.
No. What is stopping you from doing that?
Lots of things.
I want you to whittle it down to a philosophy, right? What philosophy, what is it inside of you that is stopping you from just doing that?
Right. I have, I guess, a moral belief I wouldn't cause violence for no reason.
Okay. Now that's a good answer. That same situation, you have children?
Yes.
Okay, so that same situation right now, you turned around and your child has an immediate threat to their life by this person.
Right. It changes everything.
It changes everything, right? But what changes it? It's just your belief, right?
Right. Your
On one side of
perception.
the coin, on one side of the coin, your beliefs tell you that you would not just walk up and kill a person. On the other side of the coin, if something that's important to you to a certain degree is threatened, you would now kill that person.
Sure.
The point I'm trying to make is that our belief systems, what we believe, is the most powerful thing in the world, right? We have to make that fundamental understanding that there is nothing more powerful than our thoughts and our belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So understanding that those are the most powerful thing, that means that the power is internal. That
Right.
means that how we think about things is more powerful than the response that we're having, or the immediate response that we think we're having, right? What we don't understand is our response to something that is called traumatic is a reflection of our thoughts and beliefs. Most people just don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of their lifetime, their life has been shaped in a way that has produced those thoughts and beliefs about those things.
Right. Correct. Created them. Yeah.
Has created them, right? So on one hand, you could have someone that says, hey, killing is bad, we don't do it. On the other hand, you have extreme religious sects, religious communities that are killing people wholesale in their beliefs, in the belief of in the name of their belief.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the first step. The foundation when you're down there, I think, is realizing that you do have the power, right? There is a way out. And the first step to me was realizing that I had the power to choose my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I had the power to choose how I'm going to view things. Okay. So then we move along. The second step, I think, is understanding words, understanding the power of words. Okay. And how do we express or deploy our thoughts? This is the question. How do we express or deploy our thoughts and our belief systems?
Yeah. Through what we say and do.
Right. Through what we say and do, through words or actions. Okay. So then, what is a word? If I were to ask you, Barb, to define a word, what is a word?
It's a descriptive label, a form
Mm-hmm.
of communication.
Right. So you said label, right? And I want to take that a little bit further. And my understanding of a word is just a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When my daughters were younger, I had this story that I would tell them that kind of illustrated this. Okay. And if it's okay with you, I'll tell the story now.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah. So imagine, if you will, that the world is divided into like two separate islands. That's it. One, and they're thousands of miles apart. There's a whole civilization on this island here, and there's a whole civilization on this island here. Okay. On this island, they look at, hold on, let me see. Let me grab this. They look at this and they say, this is red. On this island, they look at this and they say, this is red.
Right.
On this island, they look at this and they say, this is blue. So the question is, which island is correct?
Yeah, they both are.
They both are, right? And you understand that, but most of us don't understand that. So that leads to the question of, why are they both right?
They all have the same understanding about the color of that item.
They have all made an agreement.
Yeah.
On both islands, they made an agreement that when they see this, the symbol they're going to assign to it is red. And this island over here, when they see this, they're going to assign that the symbol blue, right? So
Yeah.
words are just symbols. They're agreements that we have made. Okay. And it's extremely important to understand that when you're communicating with another person, not just communicating, but when you're driving your life in a direction, if you don't understand that, you could be way the fuck out here in left field and not even know it, not even realize it, because the symbols you're accepting symbols that could possibly have a fucked up meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I talk back to my childhood, the I someone could say someone could say some of these things that happened to me were bad, right? And they're assigning these symbols to these words, and that now makes an incremental change in the course of your life. So over the course of our lives, if we're not aware that these words are just symbols, we could be miscommunicating
Right.
with ourselves our
Right.
entire life.
Right.
And then that's that's the foundation of what I think puts us in these bad places.
Mm-hmm.
We're making these agreements that an event equals trauma. We're making these agreements with ourselves that if this happened to me, that means this. In essence, we're choosing the pain and we're choosing the suffering, but we don't realize it because we've operated off those incremental agreements that we've made throughout our life. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think like when you find yourself in the pit, like you said, it's not, I think I have to say, like, we're not blaming that person for being in the pit because they don't know. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't know that those experiences have created these beliefs and thoughts. And in fact, it takes sometimes a really long time to unpack exactly the thoughts and beliefs that that event has created for them. So,
Right.
yeah.
And,
Hmm.
and, and here's a very simple example. Okay. My son's mother is deathly afraid of snakes. Okay. If my son is standing beside her and she sees a snake, how does a person that sees something they're deathly afraid of respond?
Well, typically they're pretty excited.
Ah, and she's fucking running away, right? If he's standing beside me and I reach down, I pick up the snake, I show the snake to him, I let him pet the snake, I let him hold the snake. The situation between her and me, the actual situation is the same, but how he experienced that situation is completely different,
For sure. Yeah.
right? And it's things like that mold us without us even knowing. When the world happens and we observe how a person responds to that molds us and we
Yeah.
don't even realize it. He's 3.5 years old. He doesn't realize that one reaction could be labeled right, one reaction could be labeled wrong, one could be labeled better, one could be labeled worse. He doesn't understand that. All he knows is if she acts like that when she sees a snake, he's supposed to act like that when he sees a snake. That snake is traumatic to her. That snake is just another opportunity for me to connect with the environment and nature to me. Right? That's the difference. That's what's important for people to understand is we go through something and based off of whatever it is that has happened, that has taught us what that is.
Yeah.
That has taught us how to view that. And now let's say that happens 3-4 times throughout the course of his, childhood. Now he's adopted that. If he doesn't have me to counterbalance that reaction, to give him perspective, to give him contrast, that's what you're supposed to do when you see a snake now,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That's what's important. That's why understanding that these words are just symbols is because now we realize that it's not a universal truth. That color being red is
Absolutely.
not it's not
Right.
a universal truth. It is
Right.
just an agreement that we've made so that we can have some level of communication with each other.
Right.
So those agreements are what's extremely important when you're now reflecting back on your life. How many fucking agreements have you made that you don't even realize
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your life? Right?
Right. And I would say like the worst thing we can do is take everything as fact
Right.
and avoid anything we perceive or have come to believe as dangerous.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and that's a
that'll,
whole nother conversation of, like that's something else that I'm extremely passionate about is how do you deal with danger, right? What is your belief around danger in general?
yeah. Well, it is
You,
why our brain does that, right? Because our brains are built for survival and they're
right.
our automatic response is to try to stay away from things that we think are dangerous, to us or other people. But
Hmm.
um you are such a natural coach. Like I'm having so much fun just right now. I can't even imagine like coming to you with something specific, you know what I mean? And just like
Yeah.
because your presence, like I feel it wholeheartedly, like you do believe, despite kind of like the some of the most quote unquote important people in your life not valuing your life, not really taking you and seeing you as an individual and like your
Mhm.
potential for growth. Like you
Right.
do see the potential in other people for growth. And I know at the
Mhm.
beginning you said like it's hard to listen to people say like I'm doing the best I can, but yet you in what you do right now, like you show up for those people who are like, "Hey, I'm doing the best I can." So like
Yeah.
how do you yeah, like how what motivates you to serve people in the way that you're serving now where it could be like someone with your history would say like whatever, like they would have no empathy for the person who says
Mhm.
I'm doing the best I can. But what you're doing is saying like, okay, that may just be an excuse, but let me show you the way. Like you're spending lots of time and energy and effort, into helping these people grow.
Right.
Yeah, it just seems I mean, it's just really cool to see because you could have just said like, "Hey, like people didn't value me. I'm in it for myself," you know?
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so, I think what the question you're trying to get to is, like, what is it that that allowed me to experience that, but then not turn to that? Is that what you're
Y-
saying?
Yeah, I think what do you think it is that keeps you available, and understanding and like
Mhm.
motivated to help other people?
God, man, that's such a good question, and it is I don't think I can pinpoint an answer to that because I've tried to ask myself that question too, like, why, Ryan?
Yeah,
Why are you
right.
doing what you're doing? And some of the easy answers are, oh, because it was done to me and I don't want, it to be done to other people. But
Sure, yeah, that's a good answer.
yeah, I mean, that's a socially acceptable answer. That's an
Right.
agreement that's an easy agreement to make, right?
Right.
Easy agreement to make. I don't really know the answer to that question. Like as far back as I can remember in my childhood, growing up, teenage years, or whatever, like I've always just gotten something from helping other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
like no matter what, like I remember being, a teenager going through junior high and high school, and like so many people would come to me that were having problems, like kids that were running away from home or whatever. They would call me and I would go pick them up and talk to
yeah,
them and then take
yeah.
them back home, and stuff like that. I remember doing that type of thing. So I can't really tell you what it is that makes me do that. But like when I do help people and I show them that there's something else, you know, that something else that they can see about their lives. Like I just get a lot of fulfillment from it.
Right.
Even
Right.
back when I had the gym, a lot of obviously it was predicated on fitness, but
Right.
just as much as the foundation was in fitness, it was in your mindset and the
Mhm.
way that you thought. So I think I've always just been fascinated with that and sharing that with people. Like the most fulfillment I had in the gym is when people, they would come in and they would go through like a 30-day program with me, and you could visibly not you could visibly see a difference, not in like they lost weight, they did that, but you could see a difference in how they moved. Like their head was up, their shoulders were back, like they were more confident
Yeah.
because they've lived a life that's told them that you had to be down there,
Right.
right? They've lived and they accepted that agreement and they believe it. And so for example, there's a person I'm coaching right now. She Through our coaching program, we got to a point where we started talking about running. And she was
Mhm.
like, "Oh yeah, I'm not a good runner. I'm not a good runner." I'm like, "Okay,
Yet.
tell me about this. Tell me about this." "Oh, because of this, and I had shin splints and blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Okay, tell me about it." And it wound up that the shin splint issue was like 13 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
13 years ago, this person went through Marine. She went through officer program with the
Mm-hmm.
Marines, right? And she wound up not making it through the program because she didn't pass the running evolutions, right? And in that program, they told her, or either they told her,
She
or
learned somehow. Yeah.
somehow she got the message that she was not a good runner,
Right.
because she was not a good runner, and she was not a good runner because fill in the blank, shin
Right.
splints, whatever, right?
Right.
At that moment, and this is important for your listeners, at that moment, she accepted that agreement. Like, that message came out and put its hand out to her, and
Right.
she accepted it. She
Right.
reached out and accepted it and said, yes, I'm not a good runner
The
because of this,
decision
this,
was
and this.
made. Yeah.
And well, yeah,
Forever.
the agreement was made,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like, I like to put it in the context of an agreement, because like
Yeah.
she made, like, someone offered her that and she accepted. So she
Right.
made an agreement at that point in time that is that is now her truth. And
Mm-hmm.
that agreement carried forward for fucking 13 years until she met me,
Yeah.
and we made a new agreement.
Right.
She just now she just completed her first ever 10K like a week ago,
That's so cool.
right?
Awesome.
So
Yes.
that we made a new agreement, we broke that, and
Yeah.
now we're moving forward,
Yeah. I
right?
love it.
Yeah. So what else we got?
Well, my last question for you
Uh-huh.
is, you have a unique path. There's no doubt about that. Where you've been, yeah, we've talked about your childhood. Didn't get into all of the service stuff, with,
Mhm.
fire service and Navy and the gym. Like, there's so many stories to tell.
Right.
But it has led you to this place, where really, like, from an outsider looking in, like, you're right where you're meant to be, right? So how would you say, or how would you advise someone who they feel this urge, this calling in a certain direction, um to serve in some way unique to them, but they don't know where or how to get started? What would your advice be for them?
Start with yourself.
Yeah.
I think the foundation answer to that is start with yourself. And what happens is, on the path of you trying to become the absolute best version of yourself,
Yeah.
the next step reveals itself,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The path, much like, if you're a believer in like quantum physics and things like that, like, you understand that the path kind of illuminates itself as you're looking, as you're moving, right? So you don't know. I've struggled with this question, because it seems like when you're looking at the world, it seems like there are people that from the time they were born, they knew exactly what they were going to do and what they were
Yeah.
going to be, right?
Yeah.
And I struggle with that because I've never had that, and I still don't.
Right.
I
Right.
still don't know that, right? But it
Right.
seems like there are some people that's just what their trajectory in life has been.
Yeah. I think
Um,
that's just what it seems like, though.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
getting, one is not getting wrapped around the axle of, am I doing what I'm supposed to do?
Right.
Because that can cause you to not move.
Yes. That's a
And
stationary question.
that's a stationary place,
Mhm.
right? So, and in my mind, like, movement is life. So, as
Mhm.
long, if you're looking to get out of the dark place, start moving yourself.
Yeah.
And, well, what do I mean by moving? Literally moving. It is extremely difficult for you to go out and run 10 miles and then come back and still feel like a piece of shit. It's
Mhm.
extremely difficult for you to go out and get in shape and have a nice body and feel like a piece of shit. It's extremely difficult for you to go to a jujitsu gym and interact with the people that are there and that energy and walk away feeling less than when you walked in, right? It's extremely difficult to read a book and that book sheds some light on your path, and for you to it's difficult for you to do that and not experience some fulfillment.
Right.
So it's just movement. I
Yeah.
think the first step is just movement,
Just
and
move.
and not just move, because the path will show itself, and we get
Right.
wrapped around like,
Yes.
I don't want to waste time. I don't want to do something that's not my calling. Like when you get to that point in life, like
Right.
I've said that 100 times, but all
Yeah,
that does is it makes you be static. It makes you
that's
not
right.
move. So
It
move,
just
move
keeps you frozen.
towards something, but move towards something. Like progress is happiness. Progress in anything it equals happiness. If you're not progressing in anything, whether it's something physical, a physical endeavor, an emotional endeavor, a psychological thing, if you're not creating movement, then I don't think you can be as happy as you could be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's so much more. I mean, to you, to what you're doing, and to your story.
Uh-huh.
Where, should people go to find you, Ryan?
Yeah, right now I'm working. I'm actually building a website right now. I don't have it quite the way I want it, but I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. Just Instagram is just my first name Ryan, and then three underscores, and then Glynn,
Okay.
Glynn. So Ryan Glynn. I'm on there. So it's pretty easy to get in touch with me through there, or Facebook at
All
Ryan
right.
Glynn. Hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. And if your website's up, or whenever it is up, we'll include it, in the show notes so that people can easily find you. If they've made some agreements that they're not happy with, I want them to seek you out. So,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So enjoyable to talk with you today. And I just want to thank you for your time and everything that you're doing in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and being able to get on here and talk with you, and you ask good questions, so that it makes everything even that much better.
All right. Until next time.